All right, good evening. Welcome to all of you who have joined us at the home offices for University Consultants of America. I think we're all learning how this works. Normally we would be speaking to you live at this time of year. I know we have many of you who use our services at UCA, and we welcome you. We also welcome those of you who don't use our services. We are a professional educational consulting firm, and I am sure Bob will be telling stories about what we do over the course of the evening, but we also provide this information to all of you free of charge. That said, if you want more information, you can always get a 30-minute consultation with one of our client managers. We encourage you to do that. I should have said my name is Bill Watson Canning. I'm the president of UCA. With me is Bob LeVine, our speaker for the evening, our CEO. And this is college admissions in 2021, what has changed and what has not changed. Things are changing rapidly. I launched this webinar about 30 seconds ago, and I'm guessing about 3 new schools have gone test optional since I launched it. You know, we are keeping it up to date as quickly as possible, but things change every day. Before I hand this over to Bob, I just want to encourage people to freely use the Q&A question and answer interface on Zoom. I will be here throughout the evening, throughout the presentation, answering questions. And there may be some questions that I think are of interest to everybody, and we'll look back at that at the end. But without further ado, let me hand this over to Bob LeVine before I mute myself and take myself away so my dogs don't interrupt too much. Bob.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, good evening, depending upon where you are. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have friends who may want the information as well, we can help them with that. It's important to us that everybody get the best possible information because we're a worldwide community. And UCA actually does work on 6 continents, everything but Antarctica. But we want to talk about what has changed and what has not changed. And given that we're in the midst of COVID-19 in most places, it feels really different. And some of it is, and some of it isn't. I'm going to answer some questions and kind of roll into this, but please do use the Q&A, use the chat. We want to be able to answer your questions at the end. One of the things that the kids in grade 12 are wondering, are the schools even going to be open in September? They'll be open. Will they be online or on campus? Hard to say. Many universities are telling students right now, look, we may be only online. At UCA, we don't think that's likely to happen. Maybe they'll start a little bit later, but it's September when they open, and I suspect they're going to want the revenues from dorms, et cetera. We think that they are telling everybody, it may not be on campus, but it may only be online, so that when the 12th graders make their deposits, they can't say, well, I didn't know and I want to change my mind. It's kind of a legal thing. But I think most likely, we think it's going to be on campus, but it's a never-changing thing. If the pandemic starts coming back again, things will change. It does seem that in the US it's starting to settle down a little bit, which is kind of the international experience. But for 12th graders, we think school is going to be open. Doesn't mean there aren't problems. The universities may have problems. Right now, American universities are, to coin a very specific phrase, freaking out. They are very worried because these are businesses and they need their students. They need their money. They are worried, will the international students be able to get visas? Because it looks like for the moment, the US is kind of suspending that. I think it's going to happen. Will they be able to process the visas quickly enough? I think it's going to happen, but one never knows, and universities think that maybe they won't get their international students. They also wonder domestically, will families allow their students to travel far from home, given the health concerns? Will they allow them to travel to New York City? Schools are worried about that. And if they don't travel, then the schools don't get their income. Speaking of income, the schools are worried about your income. Why? Because your financial portfolios are being depressed because of stock market changes and investment changes. And they're worried that many families will say, you know what? Not sure this is the best economic investment right now for us. They're just worried they won't get their students. Most of our community, our industry, believes that community colleges will do very well this year, whereas private schools and public universities might not. In fact, a couple of days ago, Furman University, which is a pretty good small college, they decided to reopen this year's admissions. People who already applied and were accepted and rejected to schools now have a chance to go to Furman. That's how freaky this is. And they're worried. And the state schools, of course, maybe that's where all this will end up. Nobody knows. And that's good for the kids in grade 12 because there's been a shift in leverage towards the students because of COVID. Universities are worried. We have had clients call the universities on the phone and say, hey, look, any chance we can get a slightly bigger scholarship? And they got twice the scholarship in one phone call. This is how it changes. Scholarships for those in grade 11 are likely to be more abundant. Now understand that for most cases, a scholarship is actually just a discount. The university is just charging you less. It's like buying a car. What's it going to take to get you into this school as opposed to off the lot with the vehicle? So we think that that's going to happen, but this is not necessarily a new change. It has been accelerated by COVID and our response to the coronavirus. It is not new. This has been coming for a while. Now, things always change, and in university stuff, things always change. You may have noticed that about a year, maybe two ago, there was this big scandal in California. A bunch of people pretending to be athletes who weren't, and some of them are going to prison, and Aunt Becky may be one of them, probably. We were wondering whether this varsity blue scandal would make a difference to university admissions. We were most wondering whether the state legislators would start passing laws about who can do this and that and the other. California likes to do that, and California was talking about it, but they never did it. So that varsity blue scandal really didn't make a big change. In fact, most of the universities that were implicated had already learned of the problem, already fixed the problem years in advance. I had heard that through the Harvard grapevine that 3 years before this broke, Harvard figured it out and changed it. So that scandal didn't mean much, but there's another scandal that did. And this is one that you don't know is a scandal, but we kind of think it's a scandal. This is the rankings scandal. Rankings mean money. They mean money to the universities. And higher rankings mean more money. US News is the king of rankings, and in most cases, you get higher in US News, you can suddenly rebuild your school and have a larger endowment. It started in 1996 with Northeastern University in Boston. Northeastern was an average local school. And in 1996, the place was literally falling apart, cracking. When the dean left and a new dean came in, the new dean said, look, we need money. We're not a state university. We're going to need donations from our alumni. But we're number 167 in US News. The alumni aren't going, woohoo, we're number 167, let's do this, let's give them money. It didn't work that way. So realizing that it's kind of impossible for any one person to have compared and contrasted over 300 universities just in their national ranking, well, the dean of Northeastern University went to his data analytics department and said, figure out what they did. And they found the algorithm. US News, like all of them, uses an algorithm, a mathematical formula to decide where the value is, and that's how they do it. Well, US News can be beaten, and the schools do that. We see this in the case of Northeastern. They started addressing every factor, and over the course of 10 years, they went from number 167 to number 107, and 10 years later, they were number 37. Those who live in the state of Florida might notice what the University of Florida has surged from in the teens to in the middle of the pack, and they want to be number 5 in public university rankings. This is all about positioning. You know it's competitive to get into them. What you may not know is how competitive it is for them to get you and to get up in the rankings. So what happened in September 2018 is that US News, with the help of the top universities, wink, wink, changed the algorithm. They changed the formula. And they did some things that you might find surprising. In the national formula, they took out the entire idea of selectivity, acceptance rate, not part of it. They added in a few other things. One of them is critical to everybody, and that's the idea of social mobility. Essentially, more people who cannot afford makes the university look better. It also benefits the schools with the largest endowment. And that's the way they keep their position. But the cost of the class is always the same for the school. They have to pay the professors and the buildings and ground and all this stuff. It's going to cost them the same. But when there are fewer people who can pay for it, because it helps the rankings, the people who they pick have to pay the rest. So we have seen, particularly in public institutions, that if you need some financial aid, need a scholarship, you're not a member of that particular state, you're not a citizen of Florida or Georgia, or wherever you're applying, maybe Michigan, maybe California. If you need money, you're not as attractive. And we saw last year that that was a shift. So the rich get richer, if you will, and the middle class got squeezed. Doesn't mean there aren't great opportunities. There are absolutely great opportunities, both cost and benefit. And that's kind of what we're in the business in. But I want you also to understand that we predicted internally a change in how the universities would do what they do. Because over the years, we could see the algorithm adjusting towards the university understanding that you actually want them. It's called demonstrating interest. This is not changed, it is developed. Demonstrating interest means you are explaining to the university that you actually want to go to that university. It's really important. Let us take, for example, I don't know, Tulane University, just out of the blue. And you're an admissions person for Tulane University, and you decide that in the area where I live, Tampa Bay, you're going to give out 100 offers of admission, and you do. And when the students decide where they're going to go to school, of those 100 people, 0 go to your school. How's that going to work when you get in the room with the admissions dean and supervisor? Not very good. It's a concept called yield. That's what they call it. The schools need to yield the students, not just make offers to them. And because of the common application, people are going to apply to more and more and more and more schools, and the universities are like, we don't know if they're coming. Your ability to show them, that makes a difference. Demonstrating interest absolutely makes a difference. And the reason they did waiting lists is because by having fewer people accepted in the regular and early offers, for a larger waiting list, they still have room in the class. So they can do what happened this afternoon to one of our students. University of Chicago called one of our students, and this is what they say: you're on the waiting list. If you tell us right now you will go, you're into Chicago. Yes or no? She said yes. We've had 3 of those students get off the waiting list. The strategy of the universities: smaller early and regular offers, more waiting lists. But with COVID and the inability to understand who is going to accept because of this pandemic where everybody's locked in the house, it was way more than we ever expected. I expected the waiting list stuff to maybe double. I think it went up by a factor of 5. What does this mean to you? Now is a wonderful time to start demonstrating interest. Usually, starting right now, 3rd or 4th week of April, many schools travel around the country and travel around the world trying to induce you, entice you, convince you to apply to them. I call them wolf packs, like 4 or 5 schools go around. And it usually starts in April, and a lot of it happens in May, the end of 11th grade. Yeah, but 11th grade kind of ended, they can't travel. So they can't do this. Just like you can't go to the campus, they can't come to you. But there is a way to get to them. And it doesn't apply for every school. It is different for every student. It is different for every university. It's called the internet. In many cases, a school will tell you that they want to hear from you by putting the names, email addresses, jurisdictions of their admissions people. They're basically slipping you their phone number. You want to call us? And then you don't. That's not going to work. Demonstrating interest has always been important. It is vitally important right now. vitally important for the 11th graders, because here's the thing. You're going to have the most difficult admissions year ever, because SATs are being canceled and school strategies are changing quite literally on a daily basis. And they don't know what they're going to do yet. And so you're navigating in a world that is unknown, and many students who are in the year ahead of you in grade 12 are starting to think, I might take a year off instead of do everything online. I may defer my enrollment, take what might be called a gap year. But they've already been accepted. If the schools allow this, and they're going to need the money from these students, then a class that is normally this size might be smaller by virtue of the amount of people who decide not to go this year. You may have a more competitive class than ever before. And so you're hearing about things like tests being canceled, schools going test optional. So let me explain that. Yes, SAT canceled the May test and the June test. Internationally, SAT also canceled the March test. So the international students have missed 3. SAT, as of this week, actually announced it last week, has decided to focus on August. They feel very comfortable that they will be able to administer tests in August, but it may not be the same test. It may not be the same test format. You might be taking it at home. And there's going to be this huge overabundance of people who couldn't take the earlier test or can take the August test because they're going into grade 12. And that could be a problem, because from one test to another test, SAT needs to equate them, but they're never going to have this population. They're talking about new test centers, more test dates, taking it home, all kinds of stuff. They're working on it now, but it may change. ACT has decided to keep their June test open and their July test. Maybe they go with the June, maybe they don't. We don't know. That's 2 months from now. And we don't know what ACT is going to do. They have a bit more experience with online at-home testing, but who knows? We're monitoring this every day, but here's one thing we do know. You can't take the test now, and you have figured it out. So much so that very few people who will need a good standardized test score are thinking about taking the test. More importantly, are thinking about preparing for the test now. So here's what we know from our friends who are SAT and ACT test preparers. They're bored. Nobody's talking to them. They don't have a lot to do now. But when COVID becomes more understandable, when what's going to happen in the future becomes more predictable, when August starts to come on board and everybody's focusing on it, they're not going to have room on the calendar for you, or maybe they won't. And many of these companies may have to let go some of their tutors. There may be a problem with prep. So our recommendation is, number 1, do consider taking SAT and ACT. Number 2, do take them with the writing section, even if most of your schools don't need it. Because if one needs you to take an SAT or ACT with writing section, you don't have it, you'll need it. But please look away from this surge towards test optional. As Bill said, probably within this discussion, 3 schools have decided to go test optional. It's happening every day. But test optional does not mean test blind. The applications will still have a place for you to put down test scores, or not. Now understand that this is an opportunity for you to impress them, not an opportunity for you to run away from a possible requirement. You want to impress them, get a good score. And please understand that around the world, your competition may already have their good scores. We know, for example, that in China, many of the families and students have already focused on this, and they have the scores. They're ready to impress the admissions people. Are you? We're not trying to be unsympathetic. We want to be empathetic. But we want you to know that perhaps you need to focus now on test preparation, even if it's not till August, because we need you to get to the space you need to be so that you get your best possible opportunity. Now, test optional, again, it's all over the place. Some consultants around the US are like, well, good, we don't need it. In most cases, getting a good test score helps. We've had a few students who are just much better in school than they are in a test center on a Saturday, and they have gone test optional and done well. Chances are that's not you. Do well wherever you can. Impress them wherever you can. This is going to be more and more of a factor because who does and doesn't take the test, who does and doesn't present the test, who does and doesn't impress the schools is really different because the schools are now changing how they do what they do in selecting students. Or are they? They're really not. They're adjusting a couple of requirements. However, the private schools have always used what we call the holistic method, which is an overall evaluation, whereas the public schools tend to be more objective in what they do, which is what we call a numbers method. In the industry is called a threshold method. They're gonna do the same thing, no matter what they tell you, no matter how it's messaged, because remember, they're trying to convince you of what they want. Well, I'm gonna share with you the holistic method. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the holistic method. This is the Harvard personal interview report. I use this for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's very complete. It's easy to see. And number two, I worked with it at Harvard for 30 years. I understand it better, but it's probably the best visual. The holistic method used by private schools is not looking for your qualification in the same sense. They're looking for your contribution. Everybody's qualified. Well, 90% of them are qualified. At Harvard, every year, they give 2,000 offers of admission. 2 years ago, I don't know the stats for this year, but 2 years ago, they had 3,500 perfect SATs for 2,000 spots and 8,000 perfect GPAs. I know you need to get good grades and good test scores, and as a professional and adult, I need to tell you, get good grades and test scores, but that is not enough. For the private schools, for our best schools, you need to understand how they educate and understand that is subjectivity involved. How do they educate? The public schools are designed to educate the people, in this case, of the great state of Florida. Private schools can kind of do whatever they want. They don't need to educate more people, they need to educate better. And this is where the diversity and the way each school does what it does, the way it teaches is very different from school to school with the private schools. But they're really looking for what you have to offer them. And that doesn't happen in a classroom. Your academic potential is not all they need because they can get you guys everywhere. Instead, they're looking for what you do outside the classroom, and that comes into two ways: what you do and how you do it. So in the holistic method, and this is the best example, it's used by most schools, even if they say it's easy. The holistic method splits you into three pieces. They evaluate your academics separately. In this case, you see a 1 to 6 grading scale. They evaluate your outside of class, non-academic stuff separately, call them extracurriculars or whatever. And then they evaluate who you are as a human being, because they're trying to put you into a group. They're trying to get you to contribute and merge with a campus. They're looking for contributors. They're looking for catalysts. They are not looking for cancer. So here it is. You will see an academic attribute. And if you have your test scores, you can roughly figure this out. Newsflash, it takes them maybe 15 seconds to evaluate all your academic stuff. They've seen all the classes, APs and IBs and all that other stuff. They know this is what they do for a profession. But they'll also look at all the stuff you do outside the classroom, and there's a grading scale, and our UCLA students know this scale much more deeply than what's even on this sheet. Then they look at your human side, which is entirely subjective. This is why there are essays. This is why there are recommendation letters. This is why there are interviews in many of these schools. They're trying to find the person. This is also why the results are not linear based upon your grades and test scores. Stanford, as an example, has 12 essays, 2 recommendation letters required, a report from the counselor, and an interview report. That's 16 pieces of writing, none of which can be graded by the computer. Trust me, after they looked at 16 things that you've written, well or not so well, your SAT score is really not that important to them anymore. They have a good idea of the human being, and that's how they come up to the overall ranking. Academics, non-academic stuff, who you are as a human being. That has not changed. That remains exactly what it was back in the day. In fact, the Harvard system started in the 1930s. It's a very humanistic system. It relies upon subjectivity, and therefore, they're trying to understand a fit, which is why your ability in essays, recommendation letters, interviews, your ability to explain yourself to them is critical. But because of demonstrating interest, you can impress them now. But so many of you are worried. My school is closed. However will I do my extracurriculars? You're not limited to your school. You have the internet. There are things that you can do. If you're a leader, lead. Find a way. Work with your classmates. Work with your school. Do whatever it takes to change the world. This is not really different. The methods that they used are the same. It does feel different. The predominant change is the emphasis towards demonstrating that you actually want to go there and that you're a good fit. And that can start and should start now. The admissions people are at home too. They're working. We can get to them. But remember, one size does not fit all. Each school is different. Each student is different. And that's where an outside consultant can make a difference. The final comment is this. Because of the way things have closed and will reopen, your work calendar may change and probably should. Here at UCA, we are likely to have our students do their essays a little bit sooner because we don't know what a high school might do in the summer. We don't know what opportunities may or may not open in the summer. So we want to get you advanced just a little bit. So work with us for our students and our families so that we can guide you to the best possible result. That's our show for tonight, but we do have questions and answers. So I'm going to throw it back to Bill to see what kinds of things we can do to give you a even better understanding of what we're trying to say.
Thank you so much, Bob. Yeah, we did have some great questions here, some of which may have been addressed in the course of the presentation, but we'll reiterate anyway. But I'm going to go with the softball first. Bob, we have people here from South America, and we've been asked to say a few words in Spanish. And the problem is that while I managed to get one of my graduate degrees in La Jolla, California, and learn not to pronounce it La Jolla, my Spanish is very weak. You want to at least speak in greeting?
And you're right. I speak only 2 languages, English and dog. I can talk to dog anywhere. However, one of our client managers is Hermenegildo Santiago. He speaks 5 languages, including Spanish. So what I would suggest is that for those who need a Spanish translation, send us an email to info@universitycoa.com. We'll be glad to do that. We will be glad to redo some of this webinar with translation. We just did it for China in Mandarin. So unfortunately, we can't answer those tonight, but we want to help. So be glad to provide that service in another language.
At the very least, OLA. All right, some of the questions that came up. Will the ability to pay tuition play any role in acceptance? I know you spoke to this a little bit. I would say a year or 2 ago, Bob and I had breakfast with a former admissions representative who pointed out something to us. In no business in the world are you told, we don't really care what your costs are next year. And colleges are a business as much as any. They are not in the business of letting in thousands of students with no idea what the blend is in terms of whether students are able to pay. It is a different blend at every school you find. A large public school out of state is going to primarily be interested in supporting the students from that state. And if you're coming in from out of state, yeah, absolutely. Your ability to pay tuition is going to be a factor. The state of North Carolina is not in the business of educating the students of the state of Florida. But if you can pay, they absolutely are. But as Bob was mentioning, at private schools, it can be a whole different range of things. At the level of a Harvard or a Princeton, where Bob and I each went respectively, they can be very, very generous still based on their endowments, based on need, and at other private schools. I think our record is we saw a student get $160,000. Yeah, something like that.
Every year we have students who get a lot of money from schools. There are certain schools who use that money to attract the ones they want to improve their profile. I do think for those who are international students that to the extent that you're an international student, you can pay. It may have felt in the past that U.S. universities are not as interested in you, and in some cases that might have been true. I think now the shift is back towards those who can pay. I think there may be more international students who are more interesting to the schools, but the short answer, if you can pay, is it going to help you? Yes.
Another question that came up a couple of times, and I'll just ask in one form here. How will colleges look at, let me see if I can phrase this right. How will colleges look at schools that give grades for the semester versus schools that give pass-fail as their grades? Look, these are literally unprecedented times. Nobody alive has been through anything like this before, and we just don't know unless you were alive during the Spanish flu pandemic, possibly, in which case, good on you. I will say schools are also aware of what is going on. In the past, there might be isolated natural disasters where you had to kind of remind a school that, you know, hey, don't forget we were shut down for some sort of reason. They're kind of aware that coronavirus is going on. They're kind of aware that they're working from home right now, and that I'm not going to say you're going to get a mulligan on stuff this semester. Do your work, get good grades to the extent you can, but they are going to have to figure out ways to look at the grades.
There was an online university, it was like 3 schools, discussion about this, and the question was, what do we do if we can't get an AP test score? And the school said, we don't really care. The fact that you took the AP and got a grade in it will make a difference. But what if I don't get a grade? They know. The truth is that if you're really worried about that, you might consider some of the private school options that look at the holistic method if you have a strong resume. And just kind of shift your focus away from the state schools that must, by legislative fiat, pick you because of numbers. But that's where individual guidance comes in.
We don't know anything yet. We are all guessing that there may be adjustments to the early schedule in the fall. No school has announced anything yet that I'm aware of, although, you know, we've been on this meeting now for about half an hour, so who knows, there could be all sorts of alerts. I would not be at all surprised if first semester of 12th grade makes a little more difference than it has in the past, just because for those of you in 11th grade, it's been a weird semester. No way around it.
If the deadlines move back a little bit, maybe a November 1st deadline moves to November 15 or December 1, your first semester grades will be more available. And if you don't have good grades, that may be a huge plus for you if you can get them for the fall, but we're not sure yet, to be determined.
And some of you had very specific questions about, you know, GMAT or something, and those we've handled offline. But the last one that did come up in a couple of forums, and I know, again, Bob addressed this to some extent, but just to reiterate, will test optional schools place less importance on the test if I already took my test?
No.
No. If you have a good test score, it always helps you, and it always has helped you. The University of Chicago has been test optional for years. The University of Chicago has never sneezed at a good test score, to my knowledge.
No, I mean, this is data, and they want as much data as possible, particularly in our better schools that have this more holistic evaluation. Your job is to impress them. I know it seems a little weird, but I often say that university admissions is a lot like dating. And you need to convince them that you should be part of their community. It's creating a relationship with the school. Not giving them information isn't going to help you impress them. It's a non-act. So if you get good scores, it's going to help you, even if it's test optional. Like I said, test optional is not the same thing as test.
A couple of new questions have come in since we're taking a Q&A. So let's ask this. Is there any, I'm going to rephrase your question slightly, but is there any difference in the way that universities look at international students in terms of what they require from domestic students? In the most narrow sense, occasionally there'll be a school that's test optional internationally and not domestically, but broadly speaking.
Yeah, the thing is this. Those of you who live outside the United States are used to methods used by UK or Australia or Canada, and they tend to be much more specific on requirements. They will have literal numbers you must hit, certain number of APs with a certain number of scores, certain SAT, a certain something, something. US doesn't really work that way. So the adjustment for us is not that significant. I think what Bill said is spot
on. How many times should you take the SAT? I love this one.
Can I take that one?
This one's a softball.
Can I take this one?
Not that we can play softball these days, but take it, Bob. How many times should I take the SAT?
Once. Get a perfect score. Move on. Have a second one just in case. Schedule yourself. Third is what I call break glass in case of emergency. The third one is it just didn't work. And strangely, at that third test, very often you get so sick of it that you just don't care as much and the test anxiety and you do amazing things. In fact, one of Bill's students a few years ago, we had to twist his arm to get the third SAT. And he got a great score and he got his school because he just didn't care. Now, statistically, past 3 tests, usually it doesn't go up, but don't just take it to see what happens. Just do your best, always. That's why this change in terms of test availability means just work on it now. Just kill it.
One of my great pet peeves is the just to see my score.
Yeah, I know how you're going to do if you're taking the test just to see your score. Not as well than if you prepare.
The question was also covering the TOEFL. I would say it's the exact same answer.
Yeah, the thing about TOEFL is that that's a threshold. It's not really a higher score helps you get in. It's will you be okay in an English-speaking classroom? You should be fine on that. Basically, you get in the hundreds. You're generally fine. And by the way, many of our best schools don't even ask for TOEFL.
I'm going to throw one out that see what your response is, Bob. Do we have any insight into how athletic and coach selections might change this year, given that selections usually happen in August of junior year?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because right now the coaches are searching for their intercollegiate athletes. You can't get to them personally. You can still get to them. So the strategies are the same, they just tend to be more online or telephone or what have you. The strategies are connect with the coaches. The strategies are have your coach connect with the coaches, get them the information now. They need to get a good team together or a good group together. If they're not getting the information, their job is harder. Make the job easier. Just get with them now. And if you have problems, I'll be glad to walk you through.
I'm going to give one more and then I'll probably stay around for a few minutes in case people want to type other stuff in. You will get a follow-up email, of course, this being a webinar, and we would love to hear from you if you have additional questions, of course. But I promise this is actually something somebody asked. It's not just queuing up a service. When's the best time for high school students to start preparing?
Yes. You know that there's a different culture around the world in different cities. What they do in New York is defined, and Bill knows New York quite well. It's like pre-Ks when they start thinking about this kind of stuff, to get into the boarding schools like Exeter and Andover, to get into the best colleges. That's not normal for most of us. Generally, worldwide, it's kind of high school when it starts, but our theory is this. Grade 9 is to get used to high school, to get the good grades, start your extracurriculars, and get the adjustment. Grade 9 is generally for the parents more than the students. It's a little early. In many parts of the US, people think about this at the end of grade 11, and many of you probably think that as well. Our preference is actually sometimes in grade 10. And we price our service so that it's just one price, whether you start in grade 10 or start in grade 11 or 12. And by the way, one of Bill's students signed up on December 23rd. And Bill, where's he going to school?
A little place in Palo Alto called Stanford.
Yeah, we can do last minute stuff, but when we start a little earlier, we can help the students understand how to build a resume by understanding what they're looking for at the universities and just making some fine adjustments. We can help the parents in working with their students. We can work with you so there's not so much conflict inside the house, because there's more time if you're in the second half of grade 10 than if it's the second half of grade 11. My personal preference, somewhere during grade 10, but please understand whether it's December 23 or November 17, which is my former favorite date because one of our students got into Stanford starting then. We can do the last minute stuff, but there's less that we can do because there's less time.
Absolutely. All right. There are some other questions that come in, but I also respect that people have, well, in my case, dogs, but also dinners and so forth to attend to. So we're going to, I think, stop broadcasting here in a second. I will stay on to answer the lingering questions that are out there for a few minutes. But thank you all. We had a great turnout today, and our favorite is to see you in person, but we do expect to be doing more of these until such time as we are able to see you in person.
If you want to watch this again, if you have friends who want to watch it, please contact us. We'll be glad to send you the link. It will be ready after we sign off. But for the moment, I'll sign off and let Bill monitor from World Headquarters for UCA. CEO and founder Bob LeVine signing off. Thank you very much, and we wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you all.